work support the private sector and the packaging industry. There are WTO rules and transparency tools that can be very helpful to you. There will also be a number of environmental considerations, including recent work in Geneva on plastic pollution, trade, and the circular economy. The WTO provides industry with the means to keep track of the fast-evolving regulatory landscape. In the WTO rulebook, the WTO Technical Barriers to Trade, that's TBT, agreement, addresses regulatory interventions, standards regulations, and conformity assessment procedures that can and often do affect trade. When it comes to packaging, the TBT agreement, that's Technical Barriers to Trade agreement, is relevant because regulations are not exclusively about the product itself, but often deal with the way products are packed or how they're labeled. Packaging is explicitly mentioned in the definitions of two key terms of this agreement: mandatory technical regulations and voluntary standards. TBT disciplines are unique. They balance government's right to regulate and pursue public policy objectives such as protection of the environment, human health, and safety, while requiring that regulations avoid discriminatory or unnecessary obstacles to trade. Let me give you a few examples of regulations with an impact on packaging. It's increasingly common for packaged food and beverages to have nutritional labeling requirements. In India, the maximum retail price, MRP, is also printed for consumer information, along with the usual expiration or best to use before date on the package. Across many countries, regulators have applied stringent statutory warnings on the packaging of tobacco products. You're all familiar with this, with textual health warnings, supplemented by pictures depicting health risks. In some jurisdictions, plain packaging is mandatory. In the areas of animal, plant, human life or health and food safety, sanitary or phytosanitary, this is called SPS, measures, may also be applied, and these should be issued and implemented in accordance with a WTO agreement called the SPS agreement. Transparency is important. Early notice of draft measures helps prevent frictions between WTO members and fosters cooperation. WTO notifications are publicly available. Globally, 8% of all measures notified to the TBT committee concern packaging or labeling. Of India's 168 TBT notifications, fully 17% relate to packaging or labeling. All stakeholders, including the private sector, can in real time track products, sectors, or markets of interest using tools such as the e-ping alert system. The working practices of WTO TBT Committee have also created space for addressing specific trade concerns. These are known as STCs. The private sector can, through their governments, use this and other mechanisms to channel concerns about transparency, discrimination, or trade restrictiveness of proposed and existing measures. About a half dozen STCs have been raised by India's trading partners on this particular topic of interest to you of packaging or labeling. Recent examples include concerns from India's trading partners about its draft food safety and standards, that's labeling and display regulations. The stated concern dealt with the front of pack nutritional labeling. Without it, was said, giving trading partners adequate time to adapt or not relying on international standards. The use of international standards is an important pillar of the TBT agreement. Regulations and standards, including those on packaging, should normally be based on international standards by promoting coherence and regulatory harmonization. International standards can be of value to the private sector. The TBT Committee has adopted 6 principles that encourage international standard-setting bodies to observe this set of procedures, all based on the use of international standards. The private sector and packaging industry can be part of the solution, helping raise standards and adopt new practices in accordance with existing WTO rules, and can take an active interest in helping to shape the rules. through regular interaction with their governments, which are active participants in the WTO deliberations and on occasion in dispute settlement. Let me emphasize that for a moment. It's very well worth your weighing in with your government to tell them what you need to defend your interests. You can make a difference. For our planet and a better future, we need to think about new practices. It can't be business as usual. It's not just governments that demand this, but consumers whose voices are increasingly heard. When it comes to packaging, discussions inevitably turn to plastic waste. Plastic that has, in some ways, become the go-to material for this industry. Plastic is versatile, durable, and cheap. It's also, unfortunately, all too often slow to degrade, which means waste, plastic waste and pollution. The World Economic Forum estimates that over 400 million tons of plastic is produced annually, of which only about 14 to 18% is formally recycled. There are, of course, alternatives available. In India, it's not uncommon to find packaging made of jute or natural fibers, which can be both aesthetically pleasing and eco-friendly. Recycling is also a common practice, with, for example, paper bags made from old newspapers. In the WTO, members have begun raising the cross-border implications of plastic pollution in the WTO Committee on Trade and the Environment. That's called CTE for short. Steps taken to address plastic pollution and facilitate global plastic circular economy are being discussed. Some members are seeking support for a WTO plastics initiative at the next ministerial meeting, now scheduled for June 2021 in Kazakhstan. Many countries have already introduced trade measures to address the scourge of plastic pollution. Between 2009 and 2018, WTO members notified 128 separate measures affecting trade in plastics for environmental reasons, mostly under this technical barriers to trade agreement. These included technical requirements related to waste management, import licensing schemes to control trade flows, and bans on single-use plastic items or shopping bags, which you well know in India. 80% of these measures were notified by developing or least developed countries. Waste can generate new economic opportunities as well as challenges. There are a broad range of trade measures that could be directed to facilitate trade for a circular economy. What's that mean? From reuse and repair to remanufacturing, recycling, and eco-design. This will require a change in approach for many stakeholders, including policymakers and the private sector, because trade and other economic activities have traditionally been conceived with a linear rather than a circular economy in mind. The WTO's tools on transparency and policy dialogue may help this transition and improve our understanding of the overlap between trade policies and circular strategies. The CTE, Committee on Trade and Environment, has been working to improve policy coherence and build mutual supportiveness. Transparency tools such as the WTO Environmental Database also help. To date, 470 trade measures have been recorded that relate to the circular economy. Initiatives such as the Environmental Goods Agreement could also contribute to the dissemination of technologies and alternatives. To quote the late Steve Jobs, who as Apple CEO knew a thing or two about packaging, packaging can be theater. It can create a story. I do hope the packaging industry can play its role for a safer, better, and cleaner planet. We all like a story with a pleasant ending. So I ask you to get involved. This makes a difference. It's a very dry subject, standards, conformity assessment, but it's the difference between your being able to participate in world trade and world trade being cut off when packaging doesn't conform with standards. So this is important, and you can have a voice. I appreciate your time, and I wish you well. Take care.